Hiya threes, we're going to finish reading chapter 24 today. Now if you remember, Stonka had just put the train into gear and they're going to try and outrun the statues. Let's see if they manage it. Where are the tunnels? She said. The far end of the Trollville, said Stonka, a couple of minutes away. They gathered speed quickly, but the leading statues vaulted the last of the wagons in the goods sidings and cut across the tracks towards them. Faster! Gasped Susie. The nearest statue closed the gap between them. Casting its sword aside, it leapt for the train, hands grasping, but fell just short, sprawling across the neighbouring tracks. Susie laughed with relief, but the next statue was right behind it, running hard. The express was still accelerating, but not quickly enough, and when the statue leapt, it struck the HEC. By leaning out of the window, Susie could just see it pulling itself hand over hand onto the roof. It's on board, she shouted. Blast it all, said Stonka, his hands flying over the instruments. Do me a favour and throw a few more bananas on the fire. We need to balance out the extra weight. Humph! With obvious pain, Ursula levered herself onto her hind legs. Not you, said Stonka, without looking round. You're in no state to do anything. Susie, shake a leg. But Susie was too preoccupied to shake anything, as Stonka's words had triggered an avalanche of thought. Wait, she murmured to herself, wait and speed. Then without warning she threw open the back door of the cab and leapt across to the tender. Oi! Stonka shouted after her, but she was already scrambling up the ladder to the pile of bananas. It was the same route she had taken into the Topaz Narrows, but there hadn't been a killer statue waiting for her then. What's happening? Cried Frederick from her pocket. I know what to do, Susie said, wincing as energy escaped from bananas, sparking and snapping against her bare hands. My homework. Homework? He cried. At a time like this? I mean Newton's laws of motion, she said. I know how to fix this. She was already over the bananas and slithered quickly down the ladder at the footplate at the rear end of the tender. A length of thick chain coupled it to the HEC and locked it in place by a stout metal rod. Newton's second law of motion, she said, wrapping her hands around the head of the rod. Apply force to a mass, in this case a train, to make it accelerate. If you keep the force the same, but you reduce the mass, then you increase the acceleration. So if I can pull this free, she strained with every ounce of strength she had until it felt like tongues of fire were crawling up her arms. She arched her back with effort, looking straight up into the sky, and that's when she saw the dreadful face of the statue looking down at her from the roof of the HEC. It lunged for her, and she leapt back in terror. Her back collided with the rear of the tender, and in a moment of cold horror she realized that she had nowhere to go. Fractured stone fingers reached for her and closed on empty air just centimetres in front of her face. Susie blinked in astonishment and then looked down at the object that she hadn't realized she was still holding, the coupling pin. The statue howled in frustration, but it was too late. As the Belle de Lune sped up, the HEC started to slow down. It happened gradually at first, but then the gap between them started widening by the second, and when the statue had made a last-ditch leap for the tender, it crashed to the tracks just short to meet her. A giddy cocktail of fear and relief welled up in Susie's chest. You see, she said, pulling Frederick from her pocket so that he could see the statue, the HEC, and the sorting car behind it, dwindling into the distance. We've got a smaller mass now, and we've lost the carriages, which means we've got a greater acceleration. They'll never catch us now. Dozens more statues had emerged from the city, but they too were receding into the distance, unable to match the Belle de Lune's remarkable speed. I'll admit that's pretty clever, he said. That's physics, she said. It's what I do. Well done, Posty, cried Stonka, as Susie re-entered the cab with Frederick once again safely in her pocket. Now brace yourself. It's almost tunnel time. Susie ran to the front window and looked out. They were fast approaching the fringes of the city, where it completed its span of the canyon below and anchored itself in solid ground. The foothills of the mountain reared up barely a kilometre ahead of them, and the tracks ran up a sheer cliff face, hundreds of metres high, with a row of tunnel mouths across it. She traced the rails of their own track to a large tunnel in the middle. The signal above it was green. The way was clear. They were going to make it. And then the roof of the cab exploded, raining chunks of burning timber down on them. They threw themselves flat, and Susie looked up through her fingers, through the smoking hole, into the roof tiles, and into the hateful eyes of Crepuscula. She was flying high above the locomotive, suspended in the claws of her monstrous gargoyle, whose wings blotted out the sun like dark sails. The creature swooped down on them, while Crepuscula took aim with her cane. There was a flash, and Susie just had time to see something like lightning jump from its tip before the cab's rear door and window blew in, and a flare of blue light engulfed everything around her. "What the devil!" she heard Stonker exclaim. Susie's vision swam back into focus. Apart from her injured paw, Ursula appeared unharmed, and Stonker was still at the controls. But behind the cab, the tender was a bonfire of blue flame, full of hissing, popping bananas. "She's going to blow us to pieces!" Stonker cried. The gargoyle sailed a short way above the cab, close enough for Crepuscula to shout down to them. "Halt!" she shrieked. "If Frederick reaches the ivory tower, it's all over. What he knows is too important." There was an explosion in the depths of the tender, sending a fresh gout of fire into the sky, and the gargoyle banked to avoid it. Crepuscula called out again as it did so, and Susie couldn't be sure what she said over the roar of the engine, but it sounded like, "The fate of the impossible places depends on it." Crepuscula raised her cane and loosened another bolt of magic, which missed. Then the gargoyle peeled away and was gone. "Disaster!" cried Stonker, pointing ahead of them through the forward window. Susie looked. Crepuscula's magic hadn't missed its mark at all. She had been aiming at the tunnel. The stone archway, barely a few 100 metres ahead, was crumbling, and the darkness inside it flickered like the image of an old TV set. Stonker threw himself at the brake lever, but Susie pushed him back. "We have to go through," she said. "The tunnel's collapsing. It will kill us." "Crepuscula will kill us if we stay here." They locked eyes as they both struggled for a purchase on the lever, neither of them gaining control. And then it was too late. As a rattling rain of stone dust struck the body of the engine, the world went dark, and the Belle de Lorne plunged through the failing masonry into the tunnel, taking Stonker, Ursula, and Susie with it. Gosh, and we're going to end chapter 24 on that cliffhanger, year 3. I will see you back tomorrow for chapter 25.